So if any of you don't already know me, my name is Sophie and I am a careers coach at Prospology. And I do free discovery calls to people who are struggling to figure out what to do next in their career. And a few times this week, I've had calls with people who are new to Toronto or new to Canada, and they're really struggling to just get their foot in the door. They have a lot of experience in a particular industry, or they're coming from, they've studied, they have credentials, they have experience, but they're finding it really difficult to find work in Canada, and they're being told you need to have X number of years Canadian experience. And it's challenging, it's really challenging. And regardless of the industry that you're in or the situation that you're in personally, there are quite a few different things that you can use to your advantage in terms of just getting started. So I want to share my experience with you, as well as things that I've learned whilst helping my clients as a coach. So let's jump straight in. Oh, I'm going to start recording. No, I already did that. Okay, perfect. Okay, so how to land a job without Canadian experience. So, as I was saying, one of the most common things that people are hearing when they're trying to find a job in Canada is you need Canadian experience. And what does that really mean? How can you ever find work if you don't have a working history in Canada? Is that something that you can work your way around, and how can you do that? So that is kind of the purpose of the session today. Also, I have compiled a list of questions and concerns that a lot of people have told me that they are struggling with or have struggled with when they first moved to Canada. So I'm going to try to bring in some of the answers to those questions as I'm going through. And then at the end, I'm going to make sure that everything has been covered, and there'll be an opportunity to ask questions if there's still something that you're not sure about or you want me to clarify further. So that will happen at the end. Okay, so I asked in a few different groups of people who are new to Canada, what are your biggest challenges, or what were your biggest challenges when you first moved over? One of them is, how do I explain my education? So if you've studied something in the UK or somewhere else, and then you come over here and it's not recognised, if the regulatory body is not recognised, or there is a certain way of doing things here, how can you kind of translate that? Also, should I be using recruiters versus looking for things on my own? Is my resume being picked up by bots? So there are bots on job sites that filter through applications, and then only certain resumes will actually be put forward for positions. What's my salary expectation? So not only are you converting from a different currency potentially, but you've also got to know what the typical salaries are in Canada and to be able to say what you expect. And obviously coming in as a newbie, you don't necessarily know what level you can start at and what you can expect to be compensated. Another challenge is, should I use job sites? Are they actually going to work? And there are a lot of there's a lot of skepticism around that, so I definitely want to mention that during the session. Why aren't I hearing back? So a lot of people will apply for things and they just won't hear back from the companies, and they don't know, are they doing something wrong? Should I be chasing up? Somebody said that they heard that they are expected to chase up more in Canada than elsewhere, so I want to get into that. What should I write in cover letters? So a few people mentioned that it's not particularly common to have a cover letter when you apply for jobs in other parts of the world, and in Canada it's quite important. So I'm going to briefly touch on that, and I have a great resource to point you towards for that as well. I'm overqualified but unemployed. So again, you know, people are worried about, should I go down a couple of levels just to get started, or is it possible to get in at the level that I'm at now? So I'm going to try to bring in these answers as we go through. But I do have a structure that I'm going to stick to, and I want to make sure that we keep to time. Okay, so a little bit about me and my background so that you can see how this has come about. So I moved to Toronto from the UK a few years ago, and it was challenging. It was really challenging. I felt like I had to start all over again. I didn't have the Canadian experience that people were asking for. I was applying for loads of jobs and I wasn't hearing anything back. And it was very discouraging. And after a certain amount of rejections or even not hearing anything, you just feel like giving up. And it's not really an option if you need to make a living. So I found it very, very challenging. And I learned a lot during that period. And that is what ultimately ended up in me becoming a coach. So my story more recently is that I started to grow a really big network in Toronto. I did a lot of informational interviews, so discussions, phone calls, coffee dates, those kinds of things, to find out about different industries and make connections. I learned a lot about differences between how it is in the UK and how it is here in terms of hiring. And a lot of the things that I learned are very valuable, and I really wanted to share them with people. So that's how Prospology came about. So here's the basic structure of what I want to go through in this webinar. Essentially, there are three main areas that I want to cover that I've learned. The first one is know your target. The second is the power of people. And the third is getting a leg up. So I'm going to go through each of these now and bring in some of my insights. So know your target. Expectations can vary significantly in Canada, depending on who you're asking for a job from. And so one of the things that I've noticed is that if you go to an agency, so agencies are very big here, and in an agency, there will be a specific type of work that they get from clients, and then there'll be a specific type of person who they give that work to as a contractor or a freelancer. And some of the contracts can be several months, like 3 months, 6 months. Often they're very short, a week or even a few days, and they can be very short notice when they come up. So they keep a database of people that they can give these jobs to, and you go through an interview process. You have your resume, you have a couple of interviews, you put together a bio of yourself, and you say, here are some of the skills that I have. Here are some of the projects that I've worked on, and you really do have the opportunity to customize that. And a huge thing that I found is that if I was applying for a job that wasn't an agency, so a full-time job or a part-time job directly to an employer, I found that the requirement for Canadian experience was much, much more significant. And I don't really know the reason for that. I guess they just want to have an initial filter to prevent people from, they don't want to waste their time. And it's easier for them to see that someone is qualified if they recognize a Canadian company, Canadian brands. And so it makes sense because you're dealing with really large scale companies with a lot of applicants. And I know it's not fair, but it's just the way it is. But one thing that I found is that agencies, because you're dealing with people one-on-one, you get that FaceTime with them from the beginning. So you make an application, and then you're pretty much guaranteed to get at least one interview with them, and that gives you a chance to just say your piece. So not only can you send your resume and tell them what you can do, but you can say it in a way that helps them understand what that experience is and what that equates to in Canada. So, for example, myself, I come from a healthcare background and my degree is in nutrition and dietetics. But that's not a degree here. Nobody takes that. Nobody recognizes the title. Nobody knows the university. So I have to then explain it was one of the top universities for that degree program, and it was the most well-respected course that I could take in order to become a dietitian. And then I can explain to them the experiences that I had working as a dietitian, and who were the healthcare providers that I worked with. What did I learn from that? How did I collaborate with them? So I can really just get past the surface level information and get straight to what was valuable about those experiences. And because you're dealing with a real life person at this point, you have that opportunity to say your piece and put yourself forward in the best possible light. And even when you write the bio, usually they'll give you an outline of we want 1 or 2 sentences about this, 1 or 2 about this, 1 or 2 about this, so that it's overall this kind of length. And also they won't they usually say don't put any of your contact information on the resume, so that when they're presenting you to clients, there's very minimal bias, because they don't know who you are. They're just looking at your experiences and what you've done. So even in the bio, if you don't have Canadian brands or Canadian companies to mention, then you can you can be creative with it. You can mention things that you can say, I worked on the largest brand in healthcare in this area, or something like that. And also the agencies, they really want to help you find work. They're much more they will help you write the bio. They'll help you put your resume together. They'll offer to look at it, a lot of them. And the reason that I'm suggesting this is not because you have to settle for temporary contract work or anything like that, but if you start off this way and then you get Canadian clients and you're doing work for them, if that's a possibility for you, and when I say with agency work, it can be anything from like instructional design, so planning course structure and content, to copywriting, to like creative types of work. But there are so many different types of agencies. There's agencies for like even background acting work. There are so many of them. So once you've got 1 or 2 Canadian clients that you've worked with, even if it was only a week or 2, you can then update your resume, update your bio to include those names, and that gets you that Canadian experience. And then you can use that outside of the agencies to apply for full-time positions or part-time positions, because you then have that Canadian experience to support you. So that's something I wanted to share in case you're not familiar with agencies and how they work. The second point that I want to put across is that it's much more common to get a job through people you know in Canada than it is elsewhere. It's very, very much about who you know, how you present yourself to people. Getting referrals from inside a company is very, very common. A lot of companies do offer referral incentives to people. I've seen them for $3,000 per person. So if this person comes into the organization and you referred them in, we'll give you $3,000. And there is no limit to the number of referrals that you can make, because they really do care a lot about culture and if someone is a good fit. And so the hiring process is much slower because of that, and they're really trying to find the right person. And so it can be very discouraging when you're applying for things and you're not hearing back for a long time. And even if you are having interviews, they can be a month, 2 months apart, and the whole hiring process could take 4 months or even 6 months. And that's normal. That's normal here. And I'm used to things being much faster paced, but yeah, it really is different in that regard. So the other option is working with recruiters, and they actually make $10,000 to $30,000 on average per referral. So when they find someone who is a good fit for a particular role in a company, and then they make that, they put that person forward, that's how much commission they make. And that's a very saturated industry. There are a lot of negative stereotypes about recruiters, because they are working on commission and because they are in it for themselves and this is their career. So they don't necessarily find the best fits for those roles. If you do want to work with a recruiter, you really do need to shop around, as they say, and find not just one, but several of them, and try to find one that is specific to the industry that you're in, because you're much more likely for them to be able to help you out. And I know I've spoken to many recruiters, and even their success rate is very, very low, because it's very competitive and because it's hard to find a good fit for someone. So one person I know, he's been a recruiter for 12 years, and he said only 5% of people he works with he's actually able to find work for. So personally, I would not recommend working with recruiters as opposed to getting out there and meeting people and networking and finding companies that you like and asking for referrals into those companies. And I have found that many people here are open to having a call, especially if you ask them in a very casual, informal type of way and you don't expect anything from them. But we're going to go into that in a little bit more detail later on. So less than a quarter of employers posting entry-level job ads would consider hiring a candidate with no work experience. So again, this is just, it's a case of packaging what you have in a way that they understand. And I think a lot of times we think that we can do that ourselves, but in my experience, the best way of doing that is to talk to people who are in that job or in that industry and they've been working in Canada for a while, and just say to them, look, can you look at my resume? Does this make sense to you? What would you be looking for if you were hiring this position? Do you know what the HR professionals or the creative director or whoever it is who would be hiring, do you know what they look for? Do you know how I can stand out? And that is the most valuable way of really presenting yourself in the best light. So the third point I wanted to make, get a leg up, I wanted to share that apprenticeships and internships, which they call co-ops here, is very, very common, and you do get a lot more full-time employment opportunities if you have done a co-op. And a lot of companies expect you to have done them because there's a lot of college programs where you can study something vocational for 9 months, 12 months, and they have a co-op, they have an internship attached to that, and you're actually expected to do that in order to get that qualification. So a lot of companies have relationships with the colleges, and they only take interns who come from these certificates. So it could be an option. I mean, if you do have some money to invest in further education, I definitely don't suggest doing something big like a degree program or something to kind of start all over again. In my experience, having a degree is enough. If it's, sometimes it needs to be in your industry, sometimes not, but that is much easier to kind of they tend to be quite broad and they're easier to apply to different situations. Whereas if you have a certificate in a specific thing that you want to do, for example, human resources management is a great one. There is a regulatory body for HR here, and if you want to get a job in HR, you are expected to be under that regulatory body, and in order to do that, you need to have taken 9 specific courses and taken the final exam that allows you to apply to be a member. And the easiest way to do that is just enroll in a 9-month part-time course that you can do alongside maybe the temporary contract work that I mentioned earlier. And then once you go through that, you get an internship, and more times than not, that will help you get into, maybe not necessarily that company, but that internship is Canadian experience. So that is what's going to get you into a full-time role that you really want. And 9 months, and the internships are usually several months, but you can even do the internships whilst you're doing the certificate. So, I don't think that it's that much time to invest. They're also not that expensive, because they are very part-time, and you can do a lot of them remotely as well. It's a good route to take, I would say, because the hiring process is so slow in Canada. So even if you're not doing any further education, you are, it could take 4 to 6 months just from applying and waiting, and that's if you're going directly and getting referrals as well. That's not just emailing, that's not just applying through job sites. So I'm going to keep going because we don't have much time left. So my opinion is that the best way to find work when you're new to Canada is to network strategically, to get these referrals from inside companies. These employees have an incentive to do so. They're going to get money, or a lot of organizations, they want new high quality people. They don't want to pay a recruiter $20,000-$30,000 when they can pay an employee $2,000 and still get a really good quality person, if not a better quality person, because they don't have to deal with that competitiveness of the commission that the recruiters get, and so on. So looking at strategic networking, the best way to learn about an industry and get into a role here in Canada, in my experience, is to do informational interviews. Now, this is a phrase that people use a lot in Canada. I hadn't heard of it before I came here, but essentially it's like you have a short phone call, 20, 30 minutes, or a meeting with them. It's very informal, casual. You ask them, I would love to know more about what you have done in your career. It's very fascinating to me. I'd love to know more about what you do in this company. It really interests me. Would you be happy to share your experiences with me? And every single time I have asked, which has been a lot of times, everyone has said yes, and they've been totally happy to do it. I will say that the more senior the person is, the more busy they are, they will, reschedule a lot, cancel a lot, whatever. But they are more than happy to do it. It's not a priority for them, but as long as you are just friendly and relaxed about it and you don't expect anything from them, then it's very, very, very useful. So to find people to interview, you can use LinkedIn. I tend to use Facebook groups a lot, because they can be very industry specific. Also, you can private message people, and you can even post in a group, I'm looking to chat with someone who is doing X specific thing. Just a 20-minute call, or I can come to you whenever it's convenient. Please and thank you, smiley face. And that works really, really well. The other thing that I do is every time I have an interview with someone, I ask them, is there someone else that I can speak to? And I always try to get at least one person or two people from them and get them to introduce me by email or give me their number or something. And that works really well, once you've had the first one or two. I've already covered how to ask for an interview. Scheduling, it's a good idea to use a scheduling tool or something like Acuity or Calendly. They're really good, just because there's a lot of admin involved going back backwards and forwards, trying to find a time that works for both of you. It's much easier to just set up a link with your calendar and then show them when you're available, and they can pick something that works for them, and then they get a reminder, and your number is already there. So it just takes a lot of the stress out of it. I've kind of covered what to talk about in the interviews, but you really want to get a good picture of what they have done. Keep the questions quite open in the beginning, because you never really know what they're going to mention. If they say something around, we're hiring for such and such, definitely go with that and say, well, I'm looking for work. Do you know anyone? Can you put in a word for me? Because the whole point of this is to get referrals. If they don't mention that, I would not bring it up, because again, like, going into an informational interview, you don't want to have that expectation from them, because they're going to be more reluctant to help you out. So always follow up with, like, who else can I speak to? Tell them how valuable it was, and just learn about, how can you make yourself stand out? How can you present yourself in the right way? What do they look for when they're hiring? What is it like working in this company? What is the culture like? How can you negotiate things in your contract? And just keep doing them, because the more you do them, the more you'll figure out how your path looks, because it's going to be different for everyone. And coming from, you're new to Canada, so you don't have a large network, and you need to grow that. How often to do interviews? Again, like, just keep going until you feel like you have enough information, because you never know. Like, every single time I've had one, it's opened up all these other doors, resources, companies, keywords that I wasn't aware of to put in my resume, and those kinds of things. Changing tactics. So as you're doing these, you'll kind of evolve. You'll start off quite general in the beginning, and then you'll realize, like, oh, this is like a niche that I want to go into, or this is a company that I really want to work for. So now I'm going to only meet people who work there, or I'm only going to talk to people who have this specialty. And it just kind of evolves as you go through. So you can get more and more specific about what it is you want to know, until you feel as though that question has been resolved. And I've answered that one. So I just want to make sure that I've covered some of these before we run out of time, because it's now 11:30. So explaining education, again, that comes from informational interviews. You need to ask people working in that field, do they understand what your resume says? And if not, then how should you write it? People are more than happy to help. So definitely do that. Recruiters, again, I don't think that it's a great idea unless they are specific to your industry. And there's no harm in using them alongside doing it yourself with strategic networking. But their success rates are very low, and I wouldn't recommend that personally. Resume being picked up by bots, I'm going to cover that in a second, because there's a great resource that I want to recommend for you guys. Salary expectation, again, this, you have to talk to people about their salary. So when you're doing the informational interviews, ask them, what salary range are you in, or what could I ask for? And that's easier for them to answer than telling you about themselves. But you need to know what is normal, what's common in the industry. It's not really something you can research online. There are a lot of like websites like Glassdoor and things like that. LinkedIn have salary ranges, but honestly, they're not very accurate. I know people who've said that they're underestimating their salary by like a third. Like their salary is 3 times higher than what it actually shows. So definitely best to talk to people directly in the industry for that. And you will be expected to tell your potential employer what salary you want. They will ask you directly, so be prepared for that. Job sites. So if you are going to use job sites, definitely apply directly to the company once you've seen that they're hiring on a job site. again, you've got to consider the bots, which I'm going to mention in a second, but it's generally not successful. You will, because you don't have that Canadian experience. So it really is better to go down the networking route. Not hearing back, so it is very common to not hear back, and like I said, the hiring process is very slow, and you need to know people in order to hear back generally, so that you actually have a direct contact to go back to. Cover letters, again, I have a really great resource for that in a second. And then the overqualified unemployed thing, this is one of the main things that you'll find out from doing the informational interviews, because it may be that you do have to go down a couple of levels and take something that's less senior in order to get your foot in the door. That's why the internships are so great, and the agency work, which can be lower compensation, but it gives you that Canadian experience. Or it may be that you can go in at senior level. I personally have experienced that. I went into the advertising agency. I've never done advertising in my life, but I realized through talking to people who did that I actually have all the skills and experience that I need. I knew how to present it to them. I knew what they were looking for. I pitched myself at senior level. I had a couple of referrals in the company, and I got hired at senior level. So it's totally possible to do that if the information comes from good quality sources, which is the people who are doing that right now. I have time for one question because I'm running out of time. So if you post it in the chat box, I will have a look in a minute. While you are writing your questions, I just want to mention these free resources that I offer before the time runs out. So I have a Facebook group. It's called Prospology. Those are the people in my community. We share articles, videos, we support each other in making changes in our career, figuring out what we want to do, and that's an amazing support group for you to join, and it's totally free, and I'm in there and I answer questions, and it's a great place to be. So you can go to Facebook and then search for Prospology and you'll find it. Another resource, so I offer free coaching sessions, so a 30-minute session for people who are trying to figure out what to do next. So maybe there's so many different starting points, and I really need to consider everyone on an individual basis. So if you want to have some more one-on-one advice, then go to prospology.com and you can book a free session with me. Job Hunt Lab. So a friend of mine has an amazing 5-step email course that helps you land interviews. It's absolutely incredible. She's a great writer. It's very easy to understand. It's very digestible, and that's at jobhuntlab.com. I highly recommend that you do that. There will be other courses coming out in the future, some free, some paid, and yeah, that's a really great place to go if you want to get help with the application side of things. Oh, and what I was going to mention is that she covers the whole bot thing, like how to make sure your resume is picked up by bots, and also what was the other thing? Oh, just how to apply directly to companies when you see that they're hiring on the job sites. That's really, really useful, and that is Lindsay's expertise, so definitely go to her for that kind of thing. But yeah, for one-on-one coaching or the Facebook group, then those are the places to go. I'm just going to see if any of you have a question that I can answer. What scheduled app do you recommend? So I have used Acuity, Acuity, and also Calendly, Calen. Oh God, I'm going to type it in here. Calendly and Acuity. Those are great. I recommend those. I wish I saw your webinar 2 months ago. Yeah, well, now you've seen it, so I will be sending it out to people to recap, and I'll probably put it in the Facebook group as well, if any new people join and then they, you know, they find this helpful. So yeah, I'm really glad that I did this. I think I've managed to cover a lot in the time that we've had. Thanks so much for joining me. Definitely check out those free resources, and I'll hopefully see you in the Facebook group. I will be emailing all of you a recording of this and also a link to book a coaching session if you do want to have one of those. Yeah, thank you so much for joining me and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.